Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here today. And thanks, David. I think he has provided a good kind of overview of where we are in terms of housing in the country and the state. And I think it's a very crucial set of issues and strategies that we can address here in the region. What I'm going to try to focus here is on one of the big projects or some of the regional efforts and how housing is embedded in, is a crucial component of the regional planning and development efforts. We have recent state legislation that you might be familiar with, SB 375. And what it does is help us in the region to connect land use and transportation. And I was talking to Dwayne the other day, and we're talking about how some of the basic tasks that one might think, how land use, housing, transportation, they must be working together. Well, not quite. But we're working in that direction, and we're working in ways that can be a little bit more meaningful. The legislation was enacted in 2008, but the region has been working, your regional agencies have been working in ways to articulate how do we think about our places, our community, our use of land, the value of our land in relationship to our transportation investments. So this is a few highlights. It's probably difficult to read, but it's a long-term strategy. The Sustainable Communities Strategy enacted by state legislation is a plan to 2040, so it's a 30-year plan. Is to think about what are some of the issues that needs to be addressed in that period of time. It addresses the quality of life. It requires that we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. It requires that we house our population and start addressing some of the challenges of housing our own workers instead of relying on adjacent counties for housing them. Now, this long-term strategy is connected to another task that you must be familiar with that has been in place for a while. That's the regional housing allocation. That's also state requirement, but it's an 8-year frame. It's specifically focused on housing, and it directly addresses how much affordable housing we need to produce within the region and in each city. So the states gives us the general numbers, and our role as a regional agency is to assess what each city needs to plan for in terms of housing, for the very low, for the low income, for the medium income, and for the above average. Next. There's one more recent component to this effort, which is the One Bay Area Grant. It's much smaller. It goes into a 3-year cycle. It's never been implemented before. We have 2 cycles ahead, starting in 2012 until 2018. And the intent is, if we have a long-range planning effort, if we have more short-term housing tasks, can we start providing some financial incentives to local jurisdictions that are engaging directly in addressing some of those specific tasks? As you know, it's a delicate balance, the relationship between regional agencies and local jurisdictions. Local jurisdictions make the decisions about how to use the land, how to regulate the land, how to designate the values that David is talking about. Our job is to provide a framework if we agree on certain goals, if we agree that the region needs to move towards sustainability, if we agree that we need to house our people, if we agree that we need to take care of the future generations and provide housing for future generations in good places, can we as a region, as a collective of different cities, create the appropriate plans, create the appropriate zoning, provide the appropriate regulations to achieve those goals? So we acknowledge the land use power and authority at the local level, but to the extent that we can coordinate the efforts and to the extent that we can provide incentives to move and achieve the specific goals, the collective goals, I think there will be a lot of value to this process. When we talk about housing, when we talk about regional strategies, the framework that we have been using is one of complete communities. And the idea is that housing for the sake of housing, jobs for the sake of jobs, transportation, transit. We can put as much money on buses if the buses don't go to places we're not moving much. So the idea is that it's not just about housing, but it's about how we live, what we need, access to schools, to parks, to food, to whatever a community needs or desires to have around. And in that process, we created two categories for this regional conversation, for this regional dialogue. The priority development areas that address the housing more directly, and the priority conservation areas, which retains our open space and rural areas. There has been a designation about 200 priority development areas, which we consider is a huge achievement, meaning local jurisdictions has chosen, have defined, are planning for creating those complete communities in their own jurisdictions. These are some examples of what these priority development areas are. They can be very dense regional centers. They can be a suburban center, meaning more auto access, more parking, but still some concentration of housing next to retail, next to health and educational services. Of a smaller scale and more thinking about corridors, we have the mixed corridor as a place type, meaning that it connects different neighborhoods in some cases. We might have buses running around El Camino Real, San Pablo, Mission Boulevard. Those are some examples that we have. I don't have other images, but we also have rural corridors. We are not expecting a lot of changes there, but to the extent that some of the rural communities can have better access to their services, it's not a lot of housing, but if they can run a few errands in one spot, either walking or driving less, that will be a convenience for everybody else. You won't be able to read much on that map, but let me explain what I tried to convey there. It's a map that shows the 200 priority development areas. They take about 4% of the total land in the region. And within that, we think we can accommodate from 70 to 80% of the total population growth in the next 30 years. So it's an effective use of our infrastructure, is to facilitate access to, again, services and jobs, is to retain our open space and our rural land, and is to enhance the qualities of our neighborhoods in ways that communities are choosing. And again, the idea here is that this is connected to the regional transportation plan, where we make decisions about where our transportation dollars go. And there is a concerted effort to support transit, to support some of the investments in neighborhoods that are taking on the housing responsibilities, on the housing task, and figure out ways to make the whole network more efficient. Just a quick reference about employment. You already heard about employment. We think we need to address some changes. We are a healthy region in comparison to many other regions around the country. Yes, we're facing still at 10% unemployment, but we have started adding some jobs. It hasn't been felt in some parts of the region, but it's starting in the South. And we trust that because of the combination of leading industries, knowledge-based industries, and a diverse economy, we'll be able to pull through and to come out of this unemployment and get to a much more active economy. These are some reference to some of the employment strategies that we think we need to address. It's not just about the major employment centers. It's about how we're choosing to increase the economic dynamic of small downtowns or small neighborhoods as well. It's also about retaining our industrial and agricultural. This is just a highlight about some of the industries that are growing above average. And it is a knowledge-based region where those are the leading sectors, but we have plenty of growth in leisure and hospitality, education, and health services. Now, in terms of employment growth, what you see on the far right, on the dark gray columns, that's the projected growth, and what you see towards the x-axis, it's the historical trends, and you see the huge drop of recent employment in the region. And as you can see, the expected growth is It approaches the economy as a healthy economy by 2040, but it's a much more modest growth than we have seen in the past. In terms of housing, again, I already mentioned some of the components. The idea is to really address the needs of our current and future population to the extent that we can accommodate housing close to transit and accessible to jobs. That's a desirable goal. And trying to address the needs of multifamily housing and the character of the neighborhood. This is one specific point that I wanted to highlight about how our region is changing. Our region is changing in different ways, but in the demographic composition, we have a major increase of the senior population. As you can see, the growth on that side, on the right side, is much larger than what you see on your left side. In the middle, there's very little growth, and that's the growth that we're expecting over the next 30 years. And some of us will choose to stay in single-family homes. Some of us will choose to live in neighborhoods that have a little bit more access to services. Similarly, in terms of the ethnic composition, as you probably know, the Latino and Asian population are growing fastest, and that has an implication in terms of the character of the neighborhoods and the type of housing. In terms of housing production, I mean, this echoes a previous presentation. You see the historical trends in the purple, and that has been, even with that, we didn't need what we needed, but in the yellow, which is what we're expecting in terms of growth, is a more modest. We think that if it's properly guided, that we can accomplish some of the affordable housing tasks. It will require some of the changes and strategies that David proposed, but we think that's a doable housing production for the next 30 years. These are some bullets. I'm not going to stop into that, so there's enough time for questions, but it echoes what David already presented. It is a big challenge. It was a challenge when we were producing single-family housing in subdivisions. It's a bigger challenge when we're trying to do multifamily housing in established neighborhoods. It's not impossible. We've done many great things in this region, but we'll need to figure out how we need to rearrange the investments, the public resources, and the regulations in order to accommodate that. This is just the schedule, just to tell you that we're in the process of producing our first draft in March. We'll complete a final draft in May. We would love to get your input. This plan is not going to be adopted until April of next year. But again, next slide. The local input is critical to this SES. Again, this is something that needs to be established at the base. It needs to be established at the neighborhood level. Our regional effort could only be successful if it addresses the specific needs of our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.